The wind howled across the empty highway as Michael Denton tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The clock on his dashboard showed 11:42 p.m., the end of another long day at Dave's auto shop where he worked as the head mechanic. The radio crackled with warnings about the worst snowstorm to hit Riverside in 20 years. Residents are advised to stay indoors. The weatherman's voice fought through the static. Road conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Michael sighed, watching the snowflakes dance aggressively in his headlights. He should have left earlier, but Mrs. Parker's old station wagon had needed extra attention, and he couldn't send her back on the road with a faulty brake line. That's not how his father had taught him to do business. His truck, reliable but showing its age at 12 years old, pushed steadily through the growing snowdrifts. The usual 15-minute drive home had already stretched to 30 minutes, and he was only halfway there. Most sensible drivers had already pulled off the road, their cars forming small, snow-covered lumps in the parking lots of closed businesses. Maybe I should do the same, Michael muttered to himself, scanning the roadside for a safe spot to wait out the worst of the storm. That's when he noticed it, faint flashing lights through the curtain of white. Hazard lights. Michael squinted, slowing his truck. Someone was stuck out here in this mess. He hesitated for just a moment. He was tired, cold, and his mom would be worried if he was too late getting home. But he couldn't drive past someone who might need help. What if they were hurt? He carefully guided his truck to the side of the road, leaving enough distance not to get stuck in the same spot. Grabbing his heavy work coat and flashlight from the back seat, he stepped out into the biting cold. The snow immediately soaked through his jeans, and the wind cut through his layers like they were nothing. "Hello," he called out, trudging toward the flashing lights. "Anyone there?" As he got closer, he could make out the shape of a car, not just any car, but a sleek, black luxury sedan that probably cost more than he made in 2 years. It had slid off the road at an angle, its front end buried in a snowbank. A small figure stood beside it, arms wrapped tightly around herself. As his flashlight beam found her face, Michael saw an elderly woman with silver hair peeking out from under a fur-trimmed hood. Her coat looked expensive but was clearly meant for style, not a blizzard. Her face was pale, lips taking on a bluish tint. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Michael called out, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. The woman looked up, relief washing over her face despite the obvious caution in her eyes. "Oh, thank goodness. My car it slid right off the road, and I can't get any signal on my phone." Michael nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Michael. I work as a mechanic over at Dave's Auto. Let me take a look at your car." The woman hesitated, sizing him up. Michael understood her caution. A strange man on a deserted road during a blizzard wasn't exactly comforting. He was tall and broad-shouldered from years of lifting car parts, with a 3-day beard he hadn't had time to shave. "I'm Eleanor," she finally said, her voice cultured but shaking slightly from the cold. "Eleanor Westfield. I was trying to reach the Lakeside Hotel when the storm got worse." Michael shined his flashlight on the car. The luxury sedan was stuck good, its wheels spinning uselessly when Eleanor turned the key. After a few minutes of inspection, he straightened up, snow covering his shoulders. "Your car's not going anywhere tonight, ma'am. The engine's fine, but you're stuck solid, and this snow isn't letting up. My truck's running just there. Why don't you warm up inside while I see if I can help?" Eleanor clutched her designer purse tighter. "I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but—" "I understand," Michael said gently. "Tell you what, take my phone. Call anyone you want to let them know you're safe. My mom's probably worried about me anyway." That small gesture, handing her his old battered smartphone, seemed to ease her worries. Eleanor nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly, following him to the idling truck with small, careful steps through the deep snow. Not many people would stop these days. Michael shrugged as he opened the passenger door for her. "My dad always said you don't drive past someone who needs help. Never know when you might be the one stuck in a snowbank." He couldn't have known then that this simple act of kindness, stopping to help a stranded stranger on the worst night of the year, would change everything. Eleanor sat stiffly in Michael's truck, her gloved hands held close to the heating vent. The warm air slowly brought color back to her face as the windows fogged up from the difference between the freezing storm outside and the warmth within. She watched Michael through the windshield, his figure becoming a blur as he battled the elements to check her car. "You really don't have to do this," she called out when he opened the driver's door, bringing in a gust of snow and cold air. "I can call a tow truck when the phone works." Michael stomped snow from his boots and rubbed his red, chapped hands together. "No tow trucks coming in this weather, ma'am. Not till morning at least." He grabbed a thermos from behind his seat and poured steaming coffee into the cup. "Here, it's not fancy, but it's hot." Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her thin fingers around its warmth. The coffee was strong and sweet, nothing like the expensive blends she was used to, but somehow perfect for this moment. "I think I can get your car unstuck," Michael said, starting the truck engine again. "But it won't be easy in this storm, and even if I do, these roads aren't safe tonight, especially not in those tires your car has." "What's wrong with my tires?" Eleanor asked, a touch defensively. Michael smiled slightly. "Nothing's wrong with them. They're just not made for this kind of weather. Those are performance tires, great for dry roads, not so great for 8 inches of snow." He pulled a worn road map from the glove compartment, an actual paper map, not a phone map. "Looks like the Lakeside Hotel is about 40 miles from here," he said, tracing the route with his finger. "That's in the opposite direction from my place." Eleanor looked down at her coffee. "I'm so sorry. I don't want to be a burden. Perhaps you could just help me back onto the road, and I'll drive very slowly." Michael shook his head. "Too dangerous. Look, I can drive you to the hotel. It's not that far, just out of the way." "I couldn't ask you to do that," Eleanor protested, though relief flickered across her face. "You didn't ask. I offered," Michael replied simply. For the next 20 minutes, Michael worked in the howling wind, attaching a tow strap from his truck to Eleanor's car, carefully pulling it free from the snowbank. Once it was back on the road, he checked it over thoroughly, but as he suspected, the luxury car wasn't going anywhere safely in these conditions. Back in the truck, he turned to Eleanor. "We'll come back for your car when the roads are cleared. For now, let's get you somewhere warm and safe." As they drove slowly through the storm, the silence between them gradually softened. Michael, usually quiet around strangers, found himself talking about his life, how he'd taken over as head mechanic at Dave's Auto after the owner had a heart attack, how business had been slow lately with the new chain repair shop opening across town. "I always wanted to open my own place," he admitted, carefully navigating around a fallen branch. "Not just repairs, but a place where kids could learn about cars too. Most high schools don't teach shop class anymore, you know. Kids don't know how to change their own oil these days." Eleanor listened, asking thoughtful questions. When Michael mentioned his mother's illness, cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago, his voice grew quieter. "The treatments are expensive," he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Insurance helps, but not enough. That's why I've been pulling double shifts." "What about your father?" Eleanor asked gently. "Passed away 5 years ago. Heart attack, just like Dave's. Guess working 2 hard runs in the family," Michael answered with a sad smile. Eleanor shared very little about herself in return, despite Michael's polite questions. She mentioned she was in town on business and was staying at the hotel for just a few days, but offered no details about what brought a well-dressed elderly woman to a small town like Riverside during the worst snowstorm of the year. After nearly 2 hours of careful driving, a trip that should have taken 45 minutes, they finally saw the lights of the Lakeside Hotel, a grand building on the shore of the town's namesake. "Here we are," Michael said, pulling up to the covered entrance where a surprised valet stood waiting. Eleanor reached for her purse. "Please, let me pay you for your trouble." Michael shook his head. "That's not why I stopped." Before heading inside, Eleanor paused, then took the simple business card Michael offered, Dave's Auto Repair, with Michael's name and the shop's phone number. "Thank you," she said simply. "People like you are rare these days." Neither of them could have guessed that their paths would cross again, or how dramatically different that next meeting would be. The morning after the snowstorm, Michael woke to sunlight bouncing off the blanket of white covering Riverside. His muscles ached from the previous night's work, both his regular shift and the unexpected rescue mission. He glanced at his phone, wondering briefly if the elegant older woman had made it through the night comfortably, then pushed the thought away. People like her and people like him rarely crossed paths for long. At the shop, Michael's coworker Pete whistled low when he heard the story. The Lakeside Hotel? Nobody stays there except big shots from the city. What was she driving? Some kind of European luxury car, Michael said, sliding under Mrs. Johnson's Honda to check her brake lines. Black, looked new. Probably some rich lady lost on her way to her ski lodge, Pete joked, handing Michael a wrench. Should have asked for a tip. Michael frowned. That's not why I helped her. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, worry, and hospital visits. Michael's mother, Diane, had started a new round of chemotherapy that left her exhausted and sick. The medical bills piled up on their kitchen table, some already stamped with second and third notices. Michael took them with him to the shop, making tense phone calls during his lunch breaks to negotiate payment plans. The shop itself was facing troubles too. Dave, the owner, pulled Michael aside one gray Tuesday afternoon, his usually jovial face sullen. Got some bad news, son, Dave said, running a hand through his thinning hair. Had a meeting with the landlord yesterday. Seems the whole block's been sold to some big development company. They're giving us 60 days to clear out. Michael stared at him in disbelief. 60 days? Can they do that? Dave nodded sadly. It's all legal. Our lease has a clause for this kind of thing. They're offering some money to help with moving costs, but he gestured around the garage they'd worked in for over a decade. Where would we go? Rents doubled everywhere in town since that tech company opened up north. That night, Michael sat at his mother's kitchen table with a calculator, a notepad, and a growing headache. Moving the shop would cost thousands they didn't have. Finding affordable space in town seemed impossible. And all this while his mother needed expensive treatments that were draining what little savings they had. Don't worry about me, Diane told him, her voice weaker than it had been a month ago. I've had a good life. You need to think about your future. Michael squeezed her fragile hand. I'm not giving up, Mom. We'll figure something out. But as days passed without solutions, hope grew harder to maintain. Michael picked up extra shifts when he could, fixing cars in his driveway on weekends for cash. He looked into loans but was turned down. His credit was already stretched thin from previous medical bills. He thought about the elegant woman from the Snowstorm exactly once during those weeks, when he found her business card that had fallen under the seat of his truck while looking for a drop screwdriver. He set it aside without a second glance. The world of people who stayed at the Lakeside Hotel might as well be on another planet from his own. Then came a Wednesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after the snowstorm, when everything changed. Michael was elbow-deep in an oil change when Pete called from the front desk. Someone here to see you, Pete said, eyebrows raised meaningfully, and you might want to clean up first. Wiping grease from his hands, Michael walked into the shop's small reception area and froze. Standing there, looking completely out of place among the dog-eared car magazines and plastic chairs, was Eleanor Westfield. She wasn't wearing the fur-trimmed coat from the storm, but a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Michael's truck. Behind her stood a younger man in an equally expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an earpiece like some kind of security personnel. Mr. Denton, Eleanor said, her voice as composed as if they were meeting in a boardroom rather than a struggling auto shop. I was hoping we might have a word in private. Pete practically shoved them into Dave's office, whispering, "What did you do?" as Michael passed. Dave himself made himself scarce, clearly sensing something important was happening. In the cramped office, with its metal desk and faded posters of classic cars on the wall, Elena sat with perfect posture while her companion stood by the door. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Denton," she began. "I wasn't entirely forthcoming when we met." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "No need to apologize, ma'am. You didn't owe me your life story just because I helped with your car." Elena smiled slightly. "Perhaps not. But I believe in honesty, especially with people who've shown me kindness." She nodded to her companion, who placed a business card on the desk between them. Michael picked it up, reading the embossed text. Eleanor Westfield, CEO, Westfield Technologies. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. Westfield Technologies was huge. A global corporation worth billions that made everything from phones to military equipment. "I wasn't just visiting Riverside by chance," Eleanor continued while Michael stared at the card. "I was here to evaluate potential locations for a new manufacturing facility. I prefer to do initial visits privately, without the fanfare that typically accompanies official corporate scouting. Michael nodded slowly, still processing what was happening. So you're? Yes, Mr. Denton. I am what some might call a billionaire. She said it simply, without pride or apology. And I've come here today because that night in the snowstorm, you reminded me of something important that I'd forgotten after decades in boardrooms and executive suites. Michael stared at Eleanor, his mind struggling to connect the elegant billionaire sitting across from him with the shivering woman he'd rescued from a snowbank. What did I remind you of? He asked finally, his voice quieter than he'd intended. Eleanor's eyes, sharp and clear despite her age, softened slightly. Decency. Simple human kindness with no expectation of reward. She looked around the small office with its coffee-stained desk calendar and faded family photos. In my world, Mr. Denton, people rarely do anything without calculating what they'll get in return. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'm no saint, ma'am. Just did what anyone would do. That's precisely my point, Eleanor said. Not everyone would have done what you did. Most would have driven past, telling themselves someone else would stop. Or they would have helped, then expected payment. She leaned forward slightly. You refused even a small payment for your time. Her assistant stepped forward, opening the leather briefcase on the desk. Michael tensed, half expecting to see stacks of cash like in some movie. I was 19 when I started Westfield Technologies, Eleanor continued. It was 1963, and people didn't take young women in technology seriously. I had nothing but an idea and determination. She smiled briefly at the memory, and one stroke of luck. A stranger who helped me when my car broke down on the way to my first investor meeting. Michael listened, still confused about why this powerful woman had returned to his humble garage. An older mechanic, Eleanor went on. He fixed my car quickly, charging me only for parts, knowing I was just a struggling student. When I tried to give him extra, he refused. Said sometimes people just need to help each other. She tapped a manicured fingernail on the desk. I made it to that meeting on time. Got my first funding. The rest is corporate history. Her assistant pulled a folder from the briefcase and placed it in front of her. I've spent 5 decades building a global company, Mr. Denton. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot that mechanic's simple wisdom. She looked directly at Michael. Until a snowy night 3 weeks ago. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. I appreciate you coming to say thanks in person, Mrs. Westfield, but really, it was nothing special. Eleanor smiled. A genuine smile that transformed her serious face. On the contrary, and I'm not here just to thank you. She opened the folder. I've been making inquiries about you, Michael. May I call you Michael? He nodded, trying not to think about what making inquiries might mean when you were a billionaire CEO. You're well respected in this community. Customers trust you. You've been caring for your mother through her illness. And now I understand your shop is being forced to relocate. She glanced up. By a development company my firm happens to own a significant stake in, as it turns out. Michael's eyes widened. Your company is the one buying this block. Not directly, Eleanor clarified. It's a subsidiary that handles real estate investments. They make decisions independently. I wasn't aware of this particular acquisition until my team researched you. She gestured to her assistant, but it does give me certain leverage. The assistant placed several photographs on the desk. Michael leaned forward, recognizing aerial shots of their block, but with the existing buildings replaced by computer-generated images of modern facilities. This is what was planned, Eleanor said, then placed another set of images beside them. And this is what I'm proposing instead. In the new images, the basic layout was similar, but Michael could see that instead of being demolished, many of the original buildings were preserved and renovated. At the center was a larger version of Dave's auto shop, with additional buildings connected to it. I don't understand, Michael said, looking up from the images. Eleanor closed the folder. 3 weeks ago, you helped me without knowing who I was or what I could do for you in return. Today, I want to help you, not as repayment, but because sometimes people just need to help each other. She smiled again, using his words from the snowstorm. Consider it my way of paying forward what that mechanic did for me all those years ago. Michael looked back at the images, still not fully comprehending what was happening. These buildings, you want to say our shop? I want to do much more than that, Eleanor said. But perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. There's a cafe 2 blocks from here that I'm told makes excellent coffee. And there's someone else I'd like you to meet, my foundation director. As they stood to leave, Michael's phone rang. He glanced at it and his face fell. I'm sorry, it's the hospital. My mother. Take it, Eleanor said gently. Family comes first. Michael answered, his back turned to Eleanor and her assistant. After a brief conversation, he hung up, his shoulders tight with worry. Everything okay? Eleanor asked. Michael shook his head. They'd found something new on her scan. The doctor wants to discuss treatment options, but he didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what he meant. Treatment options cost money he didn't have. Eleanor nodded to her assistant, who stepped out of the office. Our conversation just became even more important, I think. She gestured to the door. After you, Michael. I believe we have a great deal to discuss about your future and your mother's. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour, just after the morning rush but before lunch. Eleanor led Michael to a corner table where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a laptop was already waiting. The rich smell of coffee filled the air, a welcome comfort after the morning surprises. This is Patricia Chen, director of the Westfield Foundation, Eleanor said as they sat down. Patricia shook Michael's hand firmly, her smile warm and genuine. Eleanor has told me about your encounter, Patricia said. It's a pleasure to meet you, Michael. A waitress brought over a tray with a French press coffee and 3 cups without being asked. Michael suspected Eleanor's assistant had called ahead. Everything about these people spoke of efficiency and planning. The Westfield Foundation, Eleanor explained as she poured the coffee, manages the charitable arm of my company. We focus on education, healthcare, and community development. Michael wrapped his hands around the warm cup, feeling out of place in his work clothes with grease still under his fingernails, despite his best efforts to clean up before leaving the shop. Mrs. Westfield, he began. Eleanor, please. Eleanor, he corrected himself, I appreciate all this attention, but I'm still not sure why you're doing this. People help each other every day without billionaires showing up at their workplace. Patricia and Eleanor exchanged a glance that Michael couldn't quite interpret. Let me be direct, Eleanor said, setting down her cup. I'm not here to hand you a check as some kind of reward for helping me that night. That would be transactional. The very opposite of what you showed me. She nodded to Patricia, who opened her laptop and turned it to face Michael. On the screen was an architectural rendering of a building that looked like an updated version of Dave's auto shop, but 3 times larger. What I'm proposing, Eleanor continued, is a partnership. The Westfield Foundation would like to establish a vocational training center in Riverside, focusing on automotive technology and repair. And we'd like you to run it. Michael stared at the screen, then back at Eleanor. Me? I'm just a mechanic. I've never run anything bigger than Dave's shop. You're selling yourself short, Patricia said gently. We've done our research. Your customers trust you. The local high school principal says you've informally mentored several students who showed interest in cars. You have exactly the skills and character we're looking for. Eleanor leaned forward. The foundation would purchase the entire block that's currently under threat. Instead of tearing everything down, we'd renovate the existing structures. Dave's shop would be expanded into this training facility, but the other businesses could remain, with updated spaces and long-term leases at reasonable rates. Michael's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. And what would you expect from me? To do what you already do, Eleanor said simply. Fix cars. Teach young people who want to learn. Help build something that matters for your community. Patricia tapped a few keys, bringing up another image. The center would offer free training programs for local youth, especially those who can't afford college. Paid apprenticeships, job placement assistance, the kind of practical education that's disappearing from schools. Michael thought about his own path, learning from his father in their garage, taking classes at the community college when he could afford it, piecing together his education through years of hands-on work. It sounds amazing, he admitted, but why Riverside? Why me? Eleanor's eyes met his directly. Because sometimes the universe gives us signs, if we're paying attention. I came to Riverside to scout industrial locations, got caught in a snowstorm, and was helped by exactly the kind of person I've been looking for to lead a project like this. She paused, then added more softly, and because I believe people who demonstrate real character deserve opportunities to make bigger differences. Michael took a deep breath. And my mother's medical situation. Patricia closed her laptop. The foundation has partnerships with several leading cancer treatment centers. We would arrange for your mother to receive care at the best facility for her condition, all expenses covered. Michael felt his throat tighten. He looked down at his coffee cup, trying to compose himself. When he looked up, Elena was watching him with unexpected gentleness. "This isn't charity," she said, seeming to read his thoughts. "This is an investment in someone I believe can help many others. The medical assistance for your mother is simply part of ensuring you can focus on building something important without personal crisis undermining your work." Michael thought about his mother, about Dave's shop facing closure, about the kids in town who couldn't afford college but could build good lives with the right skills and opportunities. "I need to talk to Dave," he said finally. "He's been good to me all these years. I wouldn't want to push him out of his own business." Elena nodded. "Of course. We've anticipated that. Dave would be offered a position as senior advisor if he wants it, or a comfortable retirement package if he prefers. His choice entirely." "And one more thing," Patricia added, turning her laptop around again to show another image. This one showed the entire renovated block, with the auto center at its heart but surrounded by other small businesses. "We'd like you to help identify other local business owners to occupy these spaces. People who need a chance. People with character. People like you." Michael stared at the image, his mind filling with possibilities. His life had been a series of struggles and small victories, always just getting by. Now this stranger he'd helped on a snowy night was offering him a chance to build something lasting, not just for himself, but for his whole community. "Why would you trust me with something this big?" he asked, still hardly believing what he was hearing. Elena smiled. "Because when you had no idea who I was, when I was just a stranded old woman in a snowstorm, you showed me who you are. And that's someone worth betting on." The seasons changed, summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to winter again. Almost a year to the day after that fateful snowstorm, Michael stood in the doorway of the newly completed Riverside Automotive Training Center, watching the first snowflakes of the season drift lazily from the sky. So much had changed in those 12 months that sometimes he had to pinch himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The worn-down block that had housed Dave's auto shop was now a vibrant community hub, with freshly painted storefronts, new signage, and busy sidewalks. "Pay for your thoughts," a familiar voice asked. Michael turned to see Dave walking toward him, looking healthier than he had in years. The older man had chosen to stay on as a senior instructor rather than retire, claiming that fishing gets boring after the third day. "Just thinking about how different everything looks compared to last year," Michael replied, holding the door for his mentor. Inside, the center was buzzing with activity. The main garage area, 3 times larger than the original shop, housed 15 repair bays where students worked on everything from classic car restorations to the newest hybrid vehicles. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in natural light, a far cry from the dim fluorescent lighting of the old garage. A group of high school students in navy blue coveralls huddled around an engine while their instructor, Pate, pointed out components. In another area, adult learners practiced diagnostic testing on late-model cars donated by manufacturers who had eagerly partnered with the center. Michael's office, something he still couldn't quite believe he had, overlooked the main floor through a glass wall. On his desk sat a framed photo of his mother Diane, smiling broadly on the day she'd finished her final treatment at the specialized cancer center Elena had arranged for her. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis, using words like remission and recovery that had seemed impossible a year ago. "Mr. Denton." A young woman with a clipboard approached him. Lisa, the center's office manager, had been one of their first hires. A single mother who had previously been working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. The high school principal called. "They want to know if we can take 5 more students for the spring semester program." Michael nodded. "Tell him yes, but remind him we need the paperwork 2 weeks before the program starts this time." He smiled to soften the message. "And see if Mrs. Hayes can recommend any girls for the program. We still don't have enough female students." As Lisa walked away, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia. "Board meeting at 3. Eleanor joining by video. Big news to share." The Westfield Foundation had established a local board to oversee the center's operations, with Michael as its director. Elena herself had stayed involved, not as a distant benefactor, but as an active mentor to Michael as he navigated his new responsibilities. Their weekly video calls had become a highlight of his schedule. Elena pushed him to think bigger, challenged his assumptions, and shared wisdom from her decades of business experience. In return, he kept her connected to the real-world impact of her philanthropy, sending her photos of students working on cars and stories of lives being changed. At precisely 3 p.m., Michael sat at the head of the conference table in the center's meeting room. The local board members, including Dave, the high school principal, and owners of 2 other businesses on the renovated block, chatted amongst themselves until Patricia set up the video call. Eleanor's face appeared on the large screen, her silver hair perfectly styled as always, though Michael could see she was calling from her home office rather than corporate headquarters. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, her voice clear through the speakers. "I'll skip the formalities today because I have some exciting news to share." The room quieted immediately. Elena had that effect on people. "As you know, we've been tracking the success of the Riverside Center carefully. The enrollment numbers, job placement rates, and community impact have exceeded our projections by nearly 40%. She paused, allowing herself a small smile. "Based on these results, the Westfield Foundation Board has approved funding for 5 additional centers in other communities across the country." Murmurs of excitement filled the room. Michael felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. "And," Eleanor continued, looking directly at Michael through the camera, "we would like you to take on a leadership role in this expansion, helping us identify locations and train directors for these new centers." For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. A year ago, he'd been a mechanic struggling to pay his mother's medical bills. Now he was being offered the chance to help replicate what they'd built here in communities across the country. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. Eleanor's expression softened. "You don't need to decide right now, but I believe you're ready for this. What you've built in Riverside isn't just a training center, it's a model for how we can revitalize communities and create opportunities for people who've been left behind in our economy." After the meeting, Michael walked slowly through the building, watching students and instructors working together, listening to the familiar sounds of tools and engines that had been the soundtrack to his life. He stopped by the front desk, where a framed newspaper article hung on the wall. The headline read, "Local Mechanics' Act of Kindness Leads to Multi-Million-Dollar Investment in Community." The article told the story of the Snowstorm rescue and what had followed, though Eleanor had been reluctant about the publicity at first. Next to it hung a simple plaque with words that had become the center's unofficial motto: "Sometimes the biggest journeys start with the smallest acts of kindness." Outside, the snow was falling more heavily now. Michael zipped up his jacket, a far nicer one than he'd worn a year ago, and stepped into the parking lot. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his mother. "Don't forget, pot roast tonight. Bring Elena's latest letter. Want to hear her news too?" Michael smiled, looking up at the snowflakes swirling in the wind. 1 year ago, a snowstorm had changed everything. Now another was beginning, and with it, a whole new chapter of possibilities. 5 years had passed since that life-changing snowstorm. The morning sun streamed through the windows of a grand hotel ballroom in Chicago, where hundreds of people sat waiting for the event to begin. Banners hung from the ceiling bearing the words "Roadside Assistance Foundation, Building Futures Together." Michael adjusted his tie nervously backstage. Despite having given dozens of speeches over the past few years, the butterflies never quite went away. "You look like you could use this," a familiar voice said. Michael turned to see Eleanor, now in her early 80s but still sharp and elegant, holding out a cup of coffee to him. "Thanks," he said gratefully, taking the cup. "You'd think I'd be used to this by now." Eleanor smiled. "I still get nervous before big presentations too, even after 50 years of giving them. It means you care." A stagehand approached them. "5 minutes, Mr. Denton." Michael nodded and took a deep breath. Through the curtain, he could see his mother, Diane, now cancer-free for 4 years, sitting in the front row. Next to her sat Dave, who had finally retired last year but still visited the Riverside Center weekly to check in on his kids. Pete was there too, now the head instructor at the Cleveland Center, the third one they'd opened. "Did you ever imagine this?" Michael asked Eleanor, gesturing toward the crowded room. "That night in the snowstorm, did you ever think we'd end up here?" Eleanor considered the question, her eyes distant with memory. "No," she admitted. "I was simply cold, frightened, and grateful for a kind stranger's help." She looked at him with warmth. "But I've learned that when you invest in good people, the returns can be far greater than you ever anticipated." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the program. Patricia Chen, still the Foundation's director, stepped onto the stage to welcome the audience. On the giant screen behind her, a map of the United States displayed 50 points of light, each representing a community center established by the Foundation over the past 5 years. 5 years ago, Patricia began, a chance encounter between two strangers during a snowstorm sparked something remarkable. Today, we celebrate the opening of our 50th center and the thousands of lives that have been changed as a result. A video began playing on the screen, interviews with students who had graduated from the various centers, now working as mechanics, shop owners, and instructors themselves. Their stories were diverse but shared common themes of struggle, opportunity, and transformation. When the video ended, Patricia introduced Michael. As he walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. He looked out at the audience, instructors and students from centers across the country, business partners, community leaders, and many of the people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. "Thank you," Michael said when the applause finally died down. "People often ask me how it feels to have received such an incredible gift from a stranger. They're usually surprised by my answer." He paused, looking at Eleanor sitting at the side of the stage. "The truth is, the biggest gift wasn't the buildings or the funding, though those things made all this possible. The real gift was the reminder that a single act of kindness, with no expectation of return, can set off a chain reaction we could never imagine." Michael gestured to the screen behind him, where photos began to appear. Students working on cars, graduating ceremonies, families celebrating new jobs, communities gathering at the centers. In Riverside, where this all began, our first graduates are now opening their own shops and hiring new students. In Detroit, our center partnered with auto manufacturers to create an apprenticeship program that's become a national model. In rural communities, our mobile training units are reaching people who never thought they'd have access to this kind of education. The photos continued to scroll as Michael spoke about the Foundation's impact, not just teaching automotive skills, but rebuilding communities, creating jobs, and restoring hope in places that had been struggling for decades. "None of this happened because I did something extraordinary," Michael continued. "I simply stopped to help someone on a snowy night, the way most decent people would. The extraordinary part came after, when Eleanor Westfield chose to transform that simple act into a movement that has now touched thousands of lives." He invited Eleanor to join him on stage. She walked slowly but confidently to the podium, looking out at the audience with visible emotion. "The greatest gift for me," Eleanor said, her voice strong despite her years, "was discovering that true wealth isn't measured by what we have, but by what we give when no one is watching. Michael taught me that." She turned to face him. "And he's taught it to countless others by example, not just through this foundation, but through the way he leads his life every day." Together, they unveiled the Foundation's new initiative, a scholarship program that would help graduates start their own businesses and create even more opportunities in their communities. The audience erupted in applause again. As they left the stage, Michael noticed a young reporter waiting to speak with them. "Mr. Denton," she asked, notebook in hand, "did you ever find out why Mrs. Westfield was driving alone in that snowstorm 5 years ago? It seems like such a small, random moment to have led to all this." Michael looked at Eleanor, who smiled mysteriously. "Sometimes," she said, "you have to get lost to find exactly where you're meant to be." Outside the hotel, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting down onto the busy Chicago street. Michael and Eleanor paused to watch it for a moment, remembering another snowfall that had brought them together and changed everything. "Full circle," Eleanor said quietly. Michael nodded. "Just the beginning of another round," he corrected gently. "There's still so much more to do."